Welcome to Wadsworth History on Film, a program presented by the Wadsworth Area Historical Society and designed to record the oral history of Wadsworth for posterity. Obviously, I am not Caesar Carino, but I am your host, Joanna Perino, and I'm here with my guest today, Caesar Carino.
Nice
Welcome
to be here.
to this show. Welcome to your show.
Welcome to my show. Thank you.
I'm glad to have you here today.
And I can't think of a better person to be in that chair. You have, how many of you recorded of these shows?
Almost 400.
Almost 400 of them. And you know the procedure better than anyone else in the world, including me, and I'm supposed to be the host. So.
It's still very different being on this side of the table.
Well, this is the second time that I think I've been on this side of the table. Yeah, but it's fun.
Yes. Well, as you know, if you were anywhere near Wadsworth last year, you knew that we celebrated our 200th anniversary. 2014 was Wadsworth Bicentennial. And I had the pleasure of serving as publicity chair along with my co-chair, Kathy Hall. And there were various events and committees that organized the whole year-long event celebration. And over the past 6 months or so, along with the 400 shows you've done in your series of Wadsworth History on Film, over the past 6 months, Caesar, you've done what we call bicentennial review programs.
23 of them.
23, okay. And those are where we you interviewed the committee chairs and the people involved with the various events that occurred in 2014. The reason we did this is because in 2064, they're going to dig up the time capsule that'll be buried in August of this year. And all of these programs are going to be placed in the time capsule in an effort to allow the people that are planning the 2064 celebrations to learn how we planned and orchestrated all the wonderful events that we did last year.
But we're going to put the tapes, I guess you would call it, the discs, however it's going to be presented, going to be in 2061 from the library.
Okay.
So that they'll have the 3 years to prepare for it.
Okay, yes, and the library has a copy of actually all close to 400 of your programs. So anyone that wants to watch them can sign them out at the library, or they can call us at WCTV.
We have to keep on telling people every year that they're there, so that 50 years from now that they'll know that all they have to do is to pick those things out and they won't have any work to do.
Right. So obviously you need no introduction because anyone that has been around Wadsworth knows all the things that you do and have done. But in the spirit of the way you always do your program, I'm going to ask you as your first question to tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us where you came from, your parents, your children, your grandchildren, and remember to remember all their names.
I will
you
remember
always
all the
instruct
names.
your
That's
guests
right,
to not to forget anybody. So
I
we'll start
boned
with that.
up on that last night so that I would know that what all the names would be.
And I want to point out that even with your interview today, you came with no notes. Caesar has done every one of these 400 programs with not a note card.
I can't read. Well, actually, I was born in 1931, January 5th, 1931. And here in Wadsworth, as a matter of fact, there was a huge snowstorm that night. And my father, who had been a corpsman in the Italian Navy, knew some of the procedures to prepare my mother for this birth. And we had no telephones, but he went across the road to a lady who had a telephone. There were only 2 telephones on the entire road, and this lady across the road had a telephone, and called Dr. Johnson, Dr. Robert Johnson, who was the mayor in 1906. And that's going to be part of the entire story here in a couple of minutes. He was the mayor in 1906, and of course I was born in 1931, so he was not the mayor at that time. And he finally got there about 2 o'clock in the morning, and I was born at 2 o'clock in the morning. And he said, now, Ralph, my father's name was Ralph, he said, Ralph, what are you going to name this baby? And he said, I'm going to name him Caesar Augustus. I said, Caesar Augustus? Well, why don't you just come straight out and name him Mussolini? And my father said, I want my son to be a statesman and not a politician or a dictator. And 69 years later, when I became mayor, I related that story and indicated that Dr. Johnson, who had been the mayor at one time, made the comment about the fact that I should be named Mussolini instead of Caesar Augustus. And I said, and now I'm going to try to fulfill those words that my father said, to be a statesman rather than a politician or a dictator. So, and I have 3 brothers. I was the youngest of 4 boys. The one little older than I, 3.5 years older than I, was Henry, born 1927. And then a few years before that was Frank, born in 1922. And my oldest brother, Crescenzo, who went by Chris most of his life, was born in 1921. We were immigrants. My parents were immigrants, and we were the firstborn here in the United States. And we lived in a Pennsylvania Dutch community, and we were the only Italian family there and the only Catholic family there as well. And when my parents moved there on July 10th of 1926, the Ku Klux Klan burned a cross in our front yard.
Wow.
And my father, who also had been an interpreter in the English Navy, for the English Navy, and as an Italian naval person, seaman, spoke English with a heavy accent, but he had a tremendously good vocabulary. And he was fearless. He walked out all by himself. There were 20 or 30 people out there with hoods on and burning the cross. And he said, "You can hide your faces from me, but you can't hide them from God." And with that, they dropped whatever they were doing and walked away. So that was our introduction to Wadsworth.
Wow.
It was a long road to hoe, but with God's help and also with the hard work and all of that, we were able to overcome all of those kinds of things. And we have nothing but extraordinary pride and love for the city of Wadsworth at the present time. I went to Wadsworth Central High School at that time. Now it was Wadsworth Township School, and now it's part of the Wadsworth City District, but all of the one-room schools in Wadsworth were centralized, and they all went to Wadsworth Central High School, which was built in 1927, and then 1923, and then all of the one-room schools were closed down, essentially closed down. A couple of them kept on going, but eventually they all closed down. And all of the, quote, farm kids, that's what they called us because we were from the townships, went to Wadsworth Central High School.
And where would Wadsworth Central High School be
geographically? Geographically, it would be 1.2 miles west of the square on the north side of the road. And it was torn down in 2013.
So that would have been the old Isham School.
The old Isham School, the old Isham School. And there's a new school built on that property right now. And then I graduated from Wadsworth High School, went to Baldwin Wallace College for my undergraduate, then I went to the United States Army and served there for 2 years. Came back, got a master's degree at the University of Akron, and then a doctorate degree from Case Western Reserve University, and began teaching in Norton. And after 1.5 years of teaching, I became the principal of the school and served as principal of Sherman School for 13 years, and then was called by the county Board of Education to be a county supervisor. And then after I became a supervisor for 1 year, the University of Akron offered me a position, and I went there in 1967. And in 1968, the Dean of the College of Education, H. Kenneth Barker, now dead, asked if I would serve as his assistant to review all of the communications that came out of the college to make sure that they were grammatically correct and things of this nature. So I did. Then I became the assistant dean of the College of Education, and after 4 years of doing that, I became the dean of the evening college and summer sessions, and did that until I retired in 1989. And then from that time, from my retirement, I kept on working.
Lots of people do.
Kept on working, simply because that was probably part of my nature. I just can't sit still. My first job was to work with a school in Stowe, which was Holy Family School, and they hired me as their principal until they could get a new principal, and they couldn't get a new principal for 4 years, so I stayed there for 4 years. And then I became the chancellor at Hoban High School, and a year later I went to St. Vincent St. Mary's High School as an advisor to all of the at-risk students. And actually, I probably would have been an advisor to LeBron James, but LeBron James was an at-risk student. He's a very good student, so I didn't have him. And then I went from there to Walsh University to run a program that they were trying to develop, and I stayed there for 11 months. And then I came to Wadsworth to run for mayor of Wadsworth in 1999. And in 1999, the principal of Sacred Heart School left 11 days before school started, so they asked me to take over there as the principal. I did that for 3 months, and then I became mayor. And after I became mayor, I kept on working with an organization called TEAC, which is the Teacher Education Accreditation Council, to accredit colleges and universities in the United States. And I did that. I'm still doing that at the present day. I do 3 or 4 colleges a year. I don't do many of them. They have many teams. I'm just one of the teams, and it gives me a lot of exposure to some wonderful programs in the United States, and I bring them back and share them with my friends who are in education and so forth. Other than that, I've been just sedentary, doing nothing.
That's quite a resume.
Right.
Now, don't forget to tell us about your children and grandchildren.
Oh, yes. I'm married in 1962 to Linda Barnes from Brunswick, and we had 3 children. Michael, born in 64.
I think
64,
I think he's my age.
Yeah, 64. Christine, 65, and Gerard in 68. And then they got married. Mike married Margie Wurzbacher, and they have 2 children, Gabrielle and Nicholas. And Christine has 2 children, Alex and Sophie, and Jerry, whose name is Gerard, but we call him Jerry. Jerry has 2 children, Max and Georgia, Max and Georgia. And that's the extent of it pretty well.
Now, you mentioned you were mayor of the City of Wadsworth,
Mm-hmm.
so tell us about some other services that you...
Well, I was mayor, and this is one of the things that probably will never happen again, and I at least hope it never happens again. I was mayor when we had the 9/11 attack on the Twin Towers in New York, and that experience actually is in one of the books that I wrote, so that people will know what happened at the time and what had to happen in Wadsworth and so forth. I belong to several boards. Mm-hmm. At one time I was on 11 boards, and I got rid of about 8 of them because I kind of aged out. As a matter of fact, I was on the Stan Hewitt board for about 30 years, and I considered myself the token poor person there, because everyone who was there was a multimillionaire. Well, that's probably an exaggeration, but they were heads of organizations and corporations and so forth, and I wasn't. And I'm now the emeritus person there. I'm on the emeritus board of the American Heart Association, emeritus board of the United States Association of Evening Students, things of that nature. Mm-hmm. And just got rid of many of those because I'm too old to do it. I'll soon be 85 years old, and they don't need me, and frankly, I don't need a lot of those kinds of worries also. But I'm still on the board of St. Edward's Home, mm-hmm. and on their committee for advancement. and also on the Salvation Army Board here in Wadsworth. I was on the hospice board, and we no longer have hospice, so I'm off that one. And I was on the Medina County Board of Health, president 3 or 4 times, so that I was there for 20 years or better. And that's about...
Gosh, it's hard to remember all the things you've done.
Well,
there's quite a long list.
If I can remember them.
Well, and I've learned a lot from these history shows because I've directed a lot of them, as well as John Manning and John Bernard. But you are definitely the voice of what is history in Wadsworth. You pretty much know everything about it, and you've written a couple books about the history of Wadsworth. Why don't you tell us about those?
I've written 3, but I want to say publicly that the person who knows infinitely more than I is David Rodich.
That he knows a lot also.
David Rodich, honest to heavens, he just has so much, and I wish that he would have been the person to actually write the books, because he could do it by memory. I had to do research on it, but he is phenomenal, and I can't say enough about him. I wish I had his knowledge, but
we always felt when you did your programs that you never asked a question you didn't know the answer to.
Well, that's probably fairly true. Simply because when Wadsworth was growing, we knew everybody. We had only 1,000 families in Wadsworth, and we all went to school together. And for whatever reason, I can remember little details like people's names and where they live and telephone numbers and things like that. And yet, I might not be able to find my way home. You know, but that's a little bit of an exaggeration too. But because I go home every time that I leave here.
Well, you lived it. That's why it's easy to talk about it.
That's right, exactly.
Right. So what were the names of your books, the titles of your books?
Well, the first one was From Pioneers to Streetcars. And the streetcars came here in 1907. And what we did was to bring the community history from the time that the first 2 people came to Wadsworth in 1814, and then finally ended it at the time the streetcars came. And the only reason for that is that the publisher of the book would permit only 30,000 words, and not too many beyond that. I mean, if you got to 31,000, they'd cut some of those out, because all of the books are the exact same size, and so the 30,000th word came at the 1907, so I called it the streetcars. Then the second one was to take the personalities of the city, of the people in Wadsworth, and there were so many of them, and I had to again restrict it to only 30,000 words. So I had to be selective in whose names I put in there. And the third book is interesting items of historical interest about Wadsworth. And the only people who would be interested in that book would be people who are natives of Wadsworth, because I was started in 1920 and went through everything from the railroad track all the way up to the end of the end of High Street, and from Isham School, which is 1 mile and 2/10 away from the center of Wadsworth, or the center of the square, all the way to Durling Drive, which at that time was even beyond the outskirts of Wadsworth, and put down all of the stores and people, where they lived and who worked in the stores, and what the stores sold and so forth. And almost all of those stores are gone now. Almost none is extant. So, but the old timers in Wadsworth would appreciate going through that book. So those are the 3 books.
Okay, and we can purchase them still on Amazon.com?
Well, you can do that, yes, but there's a place in Wadsworth now, and I can't think of the name of it right this very second.
3 Roses?
No. It's that little bookstore where the bank used to be.
Oh, okay.
I can't think of the name of the store, but they have it. We were able to get all of the books that were available that had been returned to the History Press we brought them all, and we now have them we have maybe 75 or 100 left.
Okay, okay.
But it's been out of print for about 10 years.
Okay, or they can contact you if they're interested in
Surely.
it too. I have all three.
You have
and
all
signed.
Three. And signed,
yes,
right.
So that's great. So last year obviously was our bicentennial, and you were very involved with all of the activities. What committees did you serve on, and what duties did you have?
Only committees on which I served, or I should say the only committee on which I served, had two names. It was the Historical and Educational Committee. There were two committees, but we combined them into one. And however, I was the ex officio to all of the other committees because of my portrayal of General Wadsworth.
Right.
So I guess I was the, what's the old saying? A person is a master, or a jack of all trades and a master of none. So,
well, before we get into your portrayal of General Wadsworth, tell us who he was and why he was important to Wadsworth's history.
Well, General Wadsworth, General Elijah Wadsworth, and there are a lot of Wadsworth people. As a matter of fact, General Elijah Wadsworth was probably the third generation of Wadsworth people who came from England. And he was born in the 1700s, so we're talking about a lot of Wadsworths throughout the United States and England. But General Elijah Wadsworth was one of the landowners of the Connecticut Western Reserve portion, which we now call Ohio. It started in the eastern border of Ohio and went to the Firelands. Now, I'm sure that historical people will understand and know what the Firelands are, but as time goes on, they might forget. The Firelands are the borderline where the Indian tribes actually were so strong that we couldn't go beyond it. I'm going to say that the distance is probably 150 to 175 miles that direction, west of the Ohio border. And then it went from Lake Erie and down to and we are fortunate, we are at the very southern end of that Connecticut Western Reserve, and it goes to what we now call Eastern Road in Wadsworth here, which is from where we're sitting right now, 1.5 miles south of us, and that's the southernmost end of the Connecticut Western Reserve. Now, General Wadsworth and 5 others purchased this land, which we now call Wadsworth, and he put in more money than anybody else, but he never came here and he never lived here. But because he had that kind of money, they named it Wadsworth.
Okay.
Now, he actually lived in Canfield, Ohio, which is about 60 miles east of here, and he's buried there. At least we think he's buried there. We've never seen him. And there's a memorial there for him, and there's also a museum, the Wadsworth Museum, because he was very prominent in the War of 1812. He was also in the Revolutionary War, and as the Revolutionary War, he was only a captain. However, when he came to Ohio, he was a very powerful man, a strong Mason, and also a very strong, for the want of a better word, patriot. And when he came here, he went to the governor and he said, you know, I still have quite a bit of a feeling for the way that the Revolutionary War ended, and we didn't finish off the crown. The crown, of course, he was talking about the British people, or the British royalty. He liked the British people, but didn't like the English royalty. So he said, I would like to become the general, and I'll command the troops, and I will do as much as I possibly can to help in the War of 1812, and he did. And for us to go into the details of, at this point, for this program, what General Elijah Wadsworth did for the War of 1812 would take probably 3 or 4 hours, so we're not going to do that today. However, he was very prominent in the War of 1812. He was also the first postmaster in Canfield, Ohio, and did so many other kinds of things, such as start the Masonic lodges in Ohio, and he actually called all of his lodges the Western Star. And we have a Western Star in Wadsworth.
We do.
And we have so many people who have said, I wonder why they called it Western Star. And a couple of the people think that because it was in the western part of where he was, that was and it was a star, the Western Star. That's made up. I don't think it works. However, the fact that he named all of his lodges Western Star, and there's still one in Youngstown that he started, and it's still named that. It's entirely possible, and I'm going to say it's possible that the reason we call that Western Star, where they actually started, that's where the first settlers, the Deans and the Durhams, settled right there in Western Star. That probably was because it was that was the name of the Masonic lodge that he gave to all of his lodges. So. Okay.
So now we know why he was important to Wadsworth.
Right.
So how did it come about that you and your committee decided we wanted to have his presence at every one of our bicentennial meetings?
Well,
bicentennial events.
Bicentennial event.
Yes.
Before I go into that, I'd like to say that his great-grandfather, Joseph Wadsworth, no, I'm sorry, his grandfather, Joseph Wadsworth, is the person who ran the charter, the Connecticut charter, and put it in the oak tree, and the oak tree was forever then called the Charter Oak.
Oh.
So he was the person outside the window. They handed him and that's another long story, and I can't go into that.
It's another
one.
show, right?
Oh, you bet. But his grandfather was very prominent as well. So, and they had a lot of money, and money's talks.
You get naming rights when you have a lot of money, right?
Your question was?
How did it come about through your committee that you wanted to have General Wadsworth be present at every event?
Mayor Robin Lawbaugh called me and she said, would you consider doing this? And two things came to my mind. Number one, having been mayor, I know fully well that it's very difficult to get people to do things, and the fact that she wanted me to do it was not only an honor, but I knew also that she was looking for something to get off her desk. So I said, absolutely, Mayor, I'd be glad to. I didn't call her Mayor, I called her
Robin.
Robin. We're very close friends. We are not politically aligned, but I have nothing but regard and admiration for her.
She's a
wonderful lady. She is, and she's a good mayor. But she asked me to do it, so I did it. And then there were a couple little things that, as you well know, with all of the volunteers, and you would know better than anybody else because you were the fulcrum. I still consider the fact that you and Kathy Hall were the co-chairs for publicity, but absolutely everything had to go through you. So you're the fulcrum, and you probably know better than anybody else how many, this is going to be a horrible word to say because it's going to be misconstrued, but I have to say it anyway, how much drama was involved with all of these volunteers.
Yes, not in a bad way, but there's a lot of personalities and a lot of people.
That's right.
And channeling that all together is...
The second that my name was mentioned, I got phone call after phone call after phone call from various chairs asking me to be here, to be there, to be here, to be here, go over this one. I need you here. This is impossible, absolutely impossible. Sometimes there would be 3, 4, or 5 at the same time. So I called the mayor and I said, somebody's going to have to tell me what to do. So she said, well, why don't I just do that? She's so kind in any way that she does anything. It's always very kind and never self-serving. So I said, okay, fine. So if someone called me, I would call and say, now I got this call to be present, in my uniform. And she said, well, I'm not so sure that you ought to do it that way. So I didn't. So as a result, I pretty well took all of my instructions from the mayor.
Mm-hmm.
I can't think of any other ones that, well, maybe one or two maybe
Mm-hmm.
that I was able to do it on my own because I didn't have anything else that was conflicting. So I would go to all of the functions, and she assigned me to all of the big functions, like the picnic and the Founders Day and first night and things like that, and the Christmas caroling and
Yeah, we're going to talk about each
all
of
of
those.
it, right? So I did go to those, and then there were several ancillary ones to which I went, but I try to take my cue from her.
Yes. So tell us about the costume. We've been showing several pictures as you've been speaking, but tell us about the costume and where it came from. And
the costume came from a place in Akron, and there was
it Mr. Fun?
No, it's not Mr. Fun. It's another organization. It's on Manchester Road.
Okay.
It's a huge, huge place. They have 1 billion costumes in there. And I went in, and the lady said, "So, okay, you're going to be Mr. Wadsworth." And I said, "Well, General Wadsworth, yes." Well, let me tell you right off the bat, I've had all kinds of people telling me what you're supposed to look like. And if I put those all together, you would look like a clown. So I'm going to pick out the uniform that I think is going to be the best one for you. And I thought to myself, this girl has gone through a lot, and I'm not going to make it any worse for her. Because when I saw the uniform and it was red, I thought immediately, wrong color, because the English wore the red, and the Americans, well, the colonists, wore the blue. But mine was all red. I didn't say a word because she was already fired up here because someone had told her that it was supposed to be this way and that way and so forth. So I put it on, didn't fit. She said, "It will fit." And she's incensed all the time that she's talking to me. "It will fit." And so I put the trousers on, and she took a scissors or something that looked like a scissors and did some splitting and got a needle, and she sewed it all up and put it on. And unfortunately, what she had to do was to make it in such a way that there was no fly attached to it. And that made it kind of difficult for a lot of reasons. But anyway, I
You
didn't
had
say
some long stints in
long
that costume,
stints,
right?
Like one was actually 14 hours.
Oh, my goodness.
But I didn't say a word to her about that again because she already was pretty well upset about the costume. And I walked out of there and I put it on, and that became the costume, even though it was historically absolutely incorrect. So that's the costume.
And so a lot of people have asked me, did you get to keep the costume? And
No.
now I know the answer to that is no.
No, the answer was no, but if I would have got it wet, because it was some kind of a material, very, very heavy, it was thick, not an exaggeration, at least a half-inch thick, the whole thing.
And you wore that at a lot of summer
all
activities.
the summer, right.
Yes.
And it was extremely hot in the summer, but wasn't very warm in the cold weather. For instance, when we went to first night was on March 15th.
Right.
It was a beautiful sunny day, but just frigid cold. And I had a very difficult time keeping warm because they would not let me wear a coat.
And there's a picture of us at first night.
Oh,
Yes.
the two of us.
Look how
that's
I'm
good.
bundled up. So you
Right.
had to be freezing.
Yes, I was freezing. And I tried to get into one of the stores, and I had to push my way. I was the last one in because to try to get warm, and the only thing that kept me warm was the other people who were in there.
Well, now, did you stay in character
Always.
as you were? Okay.
Always in character.
So you did a lot of research on General Wadsworth, and
Well, I had the opportunity to research General Wadsworth many, many times, but what I did was to actually go to the original source in the museum in Canfield and picked out little vignettes that no one knew anything about. For instance, he had a son with whom he was terribly displeased. And this is part of history, obviously, but it's not that part of history that you talk about too terribly much. If your son displeases you, you don't go telling the whole world, because his son became part of the thrust against the Masons. And he was not happy with that at all. That did not go down well with him at all. Of course, he was dead at the time, but but we know that it did not go down well with him at all. But we picked that one up, and and again, that would be a long story to tell. That's too long to tell in this program. But there were a tremendous amount of information over there that I picked up, and I was able to give to people who would come up and ask. And the first thing that I had to do was say, no, I'm not General George Washington. I'm General Elijah Wadsworth. And then we had people who would come up and say, now, since I was in character, and I can't believe that people would not recognize that I was today, and I was not, 142 years or 168 years in the past.
Right.
But they would say, well, now, since you knew such and such a person, what was his wife like? Well, was he married? I don't know. Things like that. And then many people would come up to me and say, now, I understand that you know a lot of people in Wadsworth. Yes, I do. So, do you remember such and such? Yes, I do. Could you give me the names of all of the people who preceded that person, like his father and his grandfather? Said, no, I can't. Their expectations were far beyond what the knowledge I had, obviously.
So you mentioned first night was the first time that you were you debuted as General Wadsworth.
I debuted.
Let's talk about some of the other events that you went to. In April, we did Spirits of the Past, which was there were many people in character there. So
Abraham
tell us
Lincoln,
about that.
Abraham Lincoln overshadowed me.
I think we have a picture of Abraham Lincoln.
He overshadowed me for 3 or 4 reasons. First of all, he looked exactly like Abraham Lincoln.
He did. There's a picture of him, yes.
Abraham Lincoln. And he was about 4 feet taller than I was. Not really 4 feet, but he was about 6'7". And then he had a hat on, as you can see there. And the hat was at least 10 to 12 inches high. And I looked like he was walking his little brother.
You look like you're in amazement at his height there in that picture.
And his wife was there also, and she was a tall woman also, and she was dressed in period uniforms. And I have a loud voice, but he had a louder voice, so he overshadowed me. So I thought, I'll get out of this room and I'll go out and talk to the people down in the, there's a tent right outside the historical house. And we had rain that day, and it was horribly muddy. And the lady who was fitting me for the costume said, if you get this thing wet, 1 drop on this thing, it's yours. And if you get any mud on this thing, I can't have it cleaned from mud. I have to do it with a brush or whatever. Said, it's yours. And she gave me a whole list of things that would make it mine. And I went down this slide, which was supposed to be a walk made out of wood, and it was slippery as anyone could possibly make it. And I thought to myself, if I fall here, I'm done. This is it. But I got down there, and I stayed there most of the time for 3 or 4 reasons. Number 1, that's where the food was. Number 2, I couldn't get back up that slide. So I stayed down there most of the time. And we also had 15 women who were portraying Wadsworth people who were smart enough not to have come out of the house. So in the house we had 15 women who were the old-time Wadsworth women, and Abraham Lincoln, and I, and somewhat pleased because I was the only one in that tent down outside the building, because no one would dare come down, especially those women, because they were in not high heels, but some kind of a strange shoe, and huge dresses that are monstrously wide, and if they would have slipped, it would have probably been a disaster. So
there were torrential rains that day, I remember.
It was
yes,
horrible rain.
Yes.
And then one of my former students was there, and I had not seen her for 20, 25 years or something like that, and she was very solicitous, and it took me a while to figure out who she was because she had aged 25 years. And finally, when I recognized, I didn't ask her, and I finally figured out who she was, and she gave me a big hug and a kiss because she was so pleased that I was the only one who came down to visit with them.
And then we did the Memorial Day tribute and the parade, and that was when we dedicated the Boy with the Leaky Boot statue.
Right.
So you were there.
I was there.
As General Wadsworth. And tell us about your role in the Blue Tip Parade.
Well, the temperature was 93 degrees that day.
As it always is, sweltering and humid.
93 degrees and humid. And we were on Ramona Wanoff, who was Ramona Edis, and she was the only living person in Wadsworth, the oldest living person in Wadsworth, I should say, who was a direct descendant of the Dean family that came in 1814. So she was the one who was going to light the match, and she and I then rode on the I guess the initial float, which was a log cabin.
The Grand Marshal.
Pardon me?
Grand Marshal
Grand
float.
Marshal. And she was in a period dress, but it was very, very light. And I was in this uniform that was just swelteringly hot. But fortunately, there was just enough of a breeze when the float was pulled that it kept us a little bit cool. Then we got all the way down to the end of the parade, which is 2.2 miles, all the way down to Isham School. And we were supposed to be picked up by somebody. I've forgotten who it was, but that somebody couldn't get down there because of the crowd. So we had to walk. And
oh my goodness. That
walk was a long, long walk and with the temperature still at 93, I think it was 93 degrees. It was horribly hot.
And now the community picnic was a 3-day event.
3-day event, and I was there. That's the day that for 14 hours I did not go to the bathroom. And my job was to try to appear at the various events, I guess it was. We had them
They had
spread
activities
out.
throughout Memorial Park.
That's right.
Set up, and vendors.
Approximately 1 mile from one end to the other end. And I walked it 3 times.
Wow.
And again, the temperature was up in the high 80s that day.
And you probably didn't drink much.
I didn't drink anything, or I didn't eat anything either. And the reason I didn't eat anything is I didn't want anything to fall on my my uniform, because I didn't want to buy it.
And then after the community picnic in August, we celebrated the Founders Day weekend.
Founders Day weekend.
Which was
a
a
long
4-day
weekend.
event, yes.
That was very hot, too.
Yes.
Very, very hot.
Yes.
We opened the time capsule at noon, and the mayor invited me onto the, I guess it was
like a flatbed. We have a picture here.
Yeah,
Michael
flatbed.
Reynolds and Roger Wright were in charge of that committee.
Then I was asked to read all of the names of the people from who had placed things in the.
Oh, okay.
Who had placed things in there.
And there's the time capsule there.
There's the time capsule, and then she was asked to. As I remember, she was asked to loosen the bolts. And God bless her. I mean, she's a wonderful person, but she is not what you would call too terribly mechanically involved. And loosening those bolts was quite a feat for her. She did a very nice job, but I just wanted to go down there to help her, but that would have been the wrong thing to do.
And then we had several historic teas at homes.
That's probably 6 of them.
People that allowed us to come in their home, and there was also some characters and.
Right, each had a program.
Correct, yes.
And I went to only one of them, even though I was invited to all of them, went to only one of them because I felt that there would have been too much of a conflict.
Because they had a set program that they were going to talk about.
And they were in costume and so forth. And I was not part of that program.
So you just made a cameo appearance. And
that's right, and walked away. But on one of them, they insisted that I stay and be part of the program. And the person who did the program did a beautiful job on Teddy Roosevelt's daughter. And
was that the Alice Longworth?
Alice Longworth,
okay,
yes.
And that was portrayed by Carol McIlvaine.
Carol McIlvaine, right.
At the Williams
House. She did a phenomenal job. And her husband, Jim McIlvaine, who can become anybody he wants to be because of his acting ability, was her husband. And I just knew that this would happen. Somewhere along the line, he would say something that would just cause the entire audience to roar with laughter, and he did. It was just great. And my job there was to supposedly walk up to a family and ask what the person's name was, and then I would go and give the family history. Well, there were people there from all over, and some of them were not even from Wadsworth. So I looked around for the family that I knew the best, and I went and sat with them, and I told them all about their family history.
And then the year of our celebration ended with the Bicentennial Ball.
Right.
And I know you were there for that.
I was there for that,
fantastic.
yeah. And I went to this Bicentennial Ball, and the only thing that I didn't do was to dance because the constriction that the uniform caused was a little bit, made dancing a little bit difficult. But the one thing that I was able to do was to go from table to table, which I was asked to do, to go from table to table and to tell them thank you for coming said, I'm so pleased, I was in character, and I'm so pleased that you came to my ball, and so forth and so on. And people played along with it, maybe fat, dumb, and happy.
Now, one of the events that were not scheduled for you to be at was the WCTV Clapper Awards, but you did come in costume to the WCTV Clapper Awards.
You're going to have to tell about that, how that happened, because I wasn't aware of that was going to happen.
That wasn't on your schedule.
No, it
but
wasn't.
I kind of maneuvered that so it became part of your schedule, so that we could award you the WCTV Host with the Most award.
Host with the Most, and I was really, really honored, because that is a job that, I've been doing this for how many years? About 15 or 20 years?
I've been here 23 years, so you've been here, you've been doing shows almost that long.
And I've never actually been considered for it. So I was really pleased.
Well, and we had to think of a way to get you there. So, and part of it was the bicentennial year for our Clapper Award, so we thought that only fitting, and so it was our pleasure to award you that.
As a matter of fact, I think that someone told me, it was either you or John, one of the Johns told me, well, I better clarify that.
Yes, both the gentlemen here are named John.
John, both of them. We don't have the other kind of Johns around. No. But John Madding or John Bernard, one of the two, said, maybe you can greet people at the door. And so I did.
And we wanted you to do the introduction, because since it was the bicentennial year, so it all worked out
Well, I was really pleased for that.
That was a surprise. So are there any other, we have about a few minutes left, is there any other experiences or conversations that you had with people or memories of the year that you portrayed General Wadsworth?
Yes, there are several of them. As a matter of fact, one of them particularly, well, two of them actually particularly, well, three of them particularly. During the picnic, during the time that we were supposed to be eating about noon, noon to 1 o'clock, something like that. I was sitting at a table in the shade. Now, the reason I'm saying that is, by the time that I got up, I was in the sunshine. So that's how long I was there. An old man came to me and he said, "Do you know who I am?" I said, "Well, not really." And he gave me his name. I won't quote the name here because I don't want to embarrass him. He said, "They tell me that you know a lot about the history of people in Wadsworth." I said, "Tell me mine." I happened, just by coincidence, I happened to know it. So I went all the way back to 4 generations.
And he wasn't someone that had been on one of your history shows? No. Okay.
He had not been on one of my history shows. Matter of fact, I'm not sure he even lives in Wadsworth.
Okay.
Yeah. His family lives in Wadsworth. I'm not sure that he lives in Wadsworth. I had never seen him before. So I was able to give him the history of that. And then I was able to tell him something that he did not know about his family. There had been a death in his family about 45, 50 years ago, something like that, about 50 years ago. And I knew about that, and I mentioned it to him. Well, then he became very much interested in that person's family. You know, he knew that this person was part of his family, but he did not know how he died. Died in an accident, horrible accident. So I was able, then he wanted to know about that family. So I went all the way through that family, and the reason I'm mentioning this is that I was sitting in the shade when we started, and the sun was shining.
Oh my
and it was almost 2 hours that we were talking. And when he got up, he said, "Well, you know, I don't know when," I think he said he's something like 93 or 94 or 5 years old. He said, "I'm 95 years of age," and said, "I just want to tell you that this has been one of the greatest things that has happened to me, because I did not know something about some of my family, and now I do."
Wow.
So I was pleased with that. Another incident that kind of threw me a little bit. A woman came up to me and she said, I have, I think, a direct relationship to General Wadsworth. I said, "Well, how do you think that is?" So she said, "Do you know such and such?" And I said, "Yes, I do." "Well, she is my," I have to get it straight, "she is my real aunt's sister."
Okay.
I said, "What do you mean your real aunt?" "Well, there's a long story behind that, and I won't go through the long story, but she told me the long story, that somehow or another she wasn't part of the family where she was supposed to be, and so forth and so on. And it turned out that she was directly related to General Wadsworth.
Wow.
Actually. But now, on the first one, I told the man something that he didn't know. And this one, I know this woman, something I didn't know, and that she was, the family with whom she lived, with whom she lived, was not her family at all.
Wow.
And how she got there, something about somebody's child, and you know how that works.
Yes.
It wasn't her child and his child and so forth, and they dumped it over to another person.
And all that was hush-hush back then.
Oh, absolutely. Not a word, not a word.
Right.
So, and I learned about that one. And the third one, I was, I had walked from the far west end to the far east end to see the car show. Well, not to see the car show, but to appear at the car show. And I figured it was just pretty close to a mile. And I got over there, and 2 little girls and a woman came running up to me. And the little girls put their arms around my legs, you know, because they're wee little girls, and that's as far as they could reach. And whom I considered to be a mother, obviously, because she had 2 little girls there, gave me a big hug. I had no idea who they were. So when it was all over with, I mean, all the hugging was over with, and of course I played along with them. I hugged them. How are you, little girls? How are you, sweetheart, and so forth. And it turns out that this woman had been a student of mine 60 years ago. 60 years ago, and these were her grandchildren.
Wow.
And she said, I have been talking to these little girls about you since they were born, and they said they wanted to meet you, but they didn't want to meet General Wadsworth. They wanted to meet me, Caesar Carino, right. And they came up and hugged me. The little kid hugged my leg, and then she gave me a big hug and so forth, and a kiss. So those were the 3 or 4 things that stood out at the picnic.
That's awesome. And that had to be a very rewarding year of portraying him.
And if we have time, just one thing that I remember at the Founders Day, I was the master of ceremonies for the entire group. And I asked for people in the audience to raise their hands if indeed we had missed them. And one old man raised his hand, and we went down there and found out that he actually was a relative of Aaron Pardee, who was one of the big names here in Wadsworth at that time. Right. But it was a wonderful year. It was very stressful because I had to be so many places so many times and to stay for so long and not be able to go to the bathroom.
Well, on behalf of all the people that were involved with the Bicentennial, we thank you for everything that you've done this year and in all the years that you've been in Wadsworth. You've definitely...
The thanks go to the people who do all of the work, and you and the 2 Johns. We've already identified the fact that they are named Johns.
Right.
For being the people advertising all of these things. There's no way that we could have done it otherwise.
Well, thank you, Caesar, and it's been my pleasure to interview you today, and thanks for everything that you do for Wadsworth.
I can't think of a better person I would want to have interviewed. Thank you.
Thank you.